And I will take the record for my writing only. Yeah. So this interview will be about the LGT's ESG development, and maybe first I would like to know the LGT's values and mission towards ESG development or sustainable development. Can you share with us?
Sure. So normally I start off by saying that LGT is a very unusual firm in the sense that obviously we're a banking and asset management firm, but we're owned entirely by the royal family of Liechtenstein, or the princely family of Liechtenstein, and they are a family that has a legacy of 900 years, right? 25 over generations. So when you've survived and you've thrived for so long, sustainability is in the value system of the family. It's in the DNA of how we operate as a firm. So I think that's usually where I start. And how it links to sustainable development is because, look at the environment that we're in, right? Whether it's climate change, it's rising income inequality, it's poverty, it's environmental degradation, right? This is the reality that we work in. So how, as a firm and as a family, how can you really invest sustainably? How can you operate sustainably? And how can you really be, a thought leader in trying to change the industry, right? Because the industry is not particularly strong in these areas.
But what do you mean by thought leader? Can you elaborate?
So I think in a way that I think the families have very much been of the view that you need to be able to walk the talk, right? So I think, as one of the earliest pioneers in investing in sustainable development, so I'll share with a little bit later about the different things that we do, but the family very much believes that, if you read the recent reports, there's a 2.5 trillion funding gap, right? And we know at the same time that finance has a very powerful transformative and catalytic potential. So shouldn't finance fund this sort of gap? Right, and when they say the gaps, when you talk about the United Nations SDGs, this 17 development goals, right? It should be funding those gaps, right? Because that's what sustainable development is. But not only is it important for society and environment, but it's also important as a sustainability strategy for any firm, and it's also important as part of the value system of the family and the firm. So they all align quite nicely.
So what do you think the role of financial sector in sustainable development? What are the responsibilities? Or
It's really interesting because when you look at different industries, very few of them, like finance, cuts across all sectors, right? From healthcare, education, agriculture, energy, technology, housing, it's all funded by finance, right? So finance has the ability to influence behavior, and it has the ability to drive positive outcomes. So when you're looking at sustainable development, in many countries, especially the emerging and frontier markets, there's a real need for, there's a lack of finance. Essentially, finance has not driven many of these industries. So, I believe that finance, the finance industry as one of the most powerful forces there, has the ability to transform and really drive this sustainable development.
So how LGT embeds the ESG values or the sustainable development values into the core business?
Sure. So as you may know, we see, the firm sees, so ESG refers to environmental, social and governance, right? Essentially we see this as a discipline that goes all across our investment activities in different asset classes. So essentially what that means is whether or not it's on the listed equity side or fixed income or even our private equity investments, we try to make sure that we screen out the environmental, social, governance factors. So in other words, essentially we're either screening out the harm or incorporating the good. Okay, so that's where we start, and that goes across all asset classes. But on our impact investment, we believe that as a firm, it's not just good enough to screen out the bad. We need to proactively invest in the good or the solutions, right? And impact investment is, again, as you may know, it's all about investing proactively in companies that generate what we call triple bottom line, which means that returns in people, planet, and profit.
So rather than just screen out the bad companies, but also
actively invest in the companies that provide the solutions. So what that means is, we've always looked at, for example, poverty is a multi-dimensional beast, we would say, right? It's a multi-dimensional problem. So we believe that the 5 sectors that we invest in are very are targeted to address development of poverty. The sectors are healthcare, education, agriculture, renewable energy, and technology that includes financial inclusion, right? So when I say we invest in companies that do this, each of these companies provides a solution or positive impact in these sectors, as opposed to just screening out the bad, right? Screening out the bad might be we don't do the sin industry, so no tobacco, no ammunition, no alcohol, right? But it doesn't mean that just because you've not done the harm, that you can actually, you need to go further to invest in the solution of the good.
But do you think this can also bring benefit to the investor? Because as you mentioned, the impact investing, maybe investing in some good companies or maybe charity projects,
Yes.
but can it bring the benefit to?
It's a really good question. So I see it's one of the questions that you had there. You asked what's the difference between venture philanthropy and impact investing, right? So when we were set up in 2007, we first started from venture philanthropy, and the idea being that there were certain problems that was best funded philanthropically. That means not with, either with grant-based approaches or approaches where they were so early that returns was not predictable. Okay, so that's what we call venture philanthropy. As some of these business scale and grow, they become more mature. And what they need then is they actually need growth capital to actually become profitable and scale. That's what we call impact investing. So to your question on whether I believe that there's returns in this space, absolutely. But it needs, like any young businesses, to grow and basically to mature. And certain businesses, when they come to a certain stage that they can scale, they can produce social impact, at the same time be profitable as well. So it's a spectrum.
But at the very early stage, maybe many investors cannot see the potential of these projects. So how can LGT encourage this kind of projects?
Sure. So I think it's a really good question. I think in a place like Hong Kong, you obviously have many private investors and families being very philanthropically, they're very philanthropically active. So a lot of them are charities and foundations. I think what we've seen is on that side, typically the intention to do good is very strong, but quite often the challenge is that they have found that the solution is not scalable, it's not efficient, and there's a lack of transparency, right? So quite often, even many of us here, we give money to NGO. We hope it's good, right? But we don't really know. We have no transparency, and we don't even know if we give, say, $1,000, how they use that $1,000, right? It's not transparent how they use the money. And then even for myself, when I try to visit some of the philanthropic organizations that I've donated to, I said I'd quite like to go on the ground to visit the beneficiaries, and they don't even know. They say, oh, roughly it's somewhere in Sichuan in China, but which village, right? So I think traditional philanthropy in the way that we look needs to be improved. And you see that even philanthropists, even if they're prepared to give away all their money, they still want to have efficiency, they still want to know that money is how the money is used, and they still want to know what's the impact created, right? So we see that movement. At the same time, many of these families are wealthy, and they also realize that on the investment side, I don't want to do harm, which is where ESG comes in. But as they're looking at their portfolio, we screen out the harm, we're giving away free money here for philanthropy, but surely there has to be something that bridges the two, which is where impact investing comes in. It does more than just screening out the harm. You're actually investing in solutions, but in a way that actually provides returns, because they still want to maintain and make sure their portfolio is sustainable, right? Which also means that it needs to have returns.
So, does it mean that the high net wealthy sector, maybe they not only want the high investment return, but they want to invest in some charity project or the philanthropy projects, and that the transparency is less enough for the traditional one, but for the impact investing, as you mentioned, it has more transparency.
That's right. Yeah. So I think the first thing I'm saying is that the challenge is transparency, efficiency, and scalability, right? And impact investments at least help address some of this, right? In the sense that if a project is of the scale that it can actually attract impact investment, you know that because it's investment, it will be very transparent. You know exactly how each dollar is used. At the same time, as impact investors, they measure each and every beneficiary, each and every impact, so they know that as well. And because it's investment, as in the solution ultimately is trying to be profitable, it can scale. Whereas quite often we see a lot of clients tell us that with a philanthropic project, the moment they stop donating, the solution also stops. You see, if the donor stops giving, the charity runs out of capital. Whereas with the impact investment, first few years it might still require capital, but you come to some point of time that with when they start making profit, the solution sustains even when you pull back your capital.
So the organization itself is also a sustainable.
Absolutely. The organization typically, we see in the space, some of them are non-profits, but they still have revenue, and some of them are social enterprises or for-profit companies.
Oh, so can you mention the mission or value of the VP more to us, because as you mentioned just now. The mission.
So the mission for venture philanthropy and impact investing pretty much remains the same for us, which means that we have always been focused for 11 years on improving the lives of less advantaged people. We try to do that in a way that builds healthy ecosystems, right? Because it's a community effort, and we try to do that in a way that that builds resilient and inclusive communities. Because we want to see that a lot of solutions sometimes that, for example, in a rural area, that take the solution to an urban area. We don't want to do that because it has a negative consequence, right? We want to build an inclusive society. So that mission has remained the same across venture philanthropy impact investing. The only difference is venture philanthropy focuses on grant-based approaches, right, where it's more donation-based, right, and some early-stage investments, whereas impact investment focus on growth stage investments, so the ones which are more mature that can scale.
So, but for the venture as the VP first, how can VP screen out good companies or projects with good potential?
Okay, so the good thing is that for doing this for 11 years, we do our activities across from Africa, Latin America, and Asia, right? So the thing about us is that we have local investment managers in every country that we invest in, and we feel that's very, very important, because whether it's venture investing, you are trying to fix a local problem. It could be healthcare, it could be farming, it could be education, right? So it's important that you understand the local context of the solution. So sourcing for us is quite easy, because we've been one of the pioneers doing this since a long time. So our local investment team has a lot of ability to source the good projects. And then internally we have a pretty robust investment process where we screen deals. So having invested in so many different sectors and countries, when we look at a business model, we kind of know which are the strengths and which are the weaknesses. So that's one way that we identify what we think are to be strong solutions.
So, as you mentioned, that impact investment is more focused on the growth stage.
Yes.
Is it?
So so the way to look at it is from the venture philanthropy projects. Some of them will mature, and then when they mature, we then come in more as an impact investor to give them growth capital, because in a way they've been de-risked and they're ready to grow, right? So that's kind of how the parts fit together. There are certain projects, for example, that will only remain as venture philanthropy. For example, we have one in India called Educate Girls. I mean, the background for Educate Girls is essentially, if you look at Rajasthan, which is where some of us have visited, but many of the girls there don't even have education, because something like 60% of them are married before they're 18, half of whom are married before 12. So unfortunately, many of the families there don't see girls as they should go to school. They're asset to be married off. So we want to change that behavior. So Educate Girls has a whole team of essentially girls that are educated by them. They go door to door, and they work with them to change the mindset. And through that process, they've brought over 1 million children to school. And many of them, the large majority of them are girls, hence Educate Girls. And it's something that we philanthropically support. In fact, my colleagues at LGT Bank also donate and support them. But it's not something that, because of the model, can be an impact investment. You see what I mean? But it does address the issue of scale, and does also address the issue of transparency, because they run very well. So that's Educate Girls. And then maybe another example in China is is something called IPE, Institute of Public and Environment. And it's a very famous guy in China called Ma Jun, M-A-J-U-N. You can Google search him. He is one of China's leading environmental activists. And if you watch the recent documentary Before the Flood by Leonardo DiCaprio, that he's the only Chinese person that they interview. And Ma Jun is very interesting because he works with about, we funded a pollution app because China has a huge problem with pollution, right? So he goes, he has teams that go provincially to check all the emissions. So he films all this, all the emission levels, and then he goes back to the company. He works with about, I think, 20,000 companies now across China to show them real time what is the pollution level. So he works with them and with the provincial government to try to reduce the levels. And he works with the likes of Apple, for example. Okay, actually I can show you if it's interesting, because I can actually show you the app because it's real time. It actually shows you the pollution.
But is it the company you're in, LGT?
So we support IPE. And we, again, why I bring this up is because we support this through our venture philanthropy. Because if you're funding something like pollution, are you going to get returns, right? So I'm trying to show that the best capital to fund a anti-pollution solution, or goals when you're trying to fight a culture, is still a grant-based approach. And that's why I'm trying to show you the difference between venture philanthropy or impact investing. But with impact investing, a couple of examples there would be, for example, we fund one in Africa called M-KOPA. Okay, and M-KOPA provides low-cost solar home systems, essentially to rural poor households in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. Okay, and the idea being that many of them are energy poor, but they have access to their mobile, right? And currently they're using kerosene as a way of lighting. They pay about 50 cents for the kerosene, but kerosene is terrible, right? Because of the health reasons, environmental reasons. Would you allow your son or daughter to study with a live flame reading a paper book, right? So you can understand the problems. Now, on the other hand, mobile penetration is very high in Africa. So they use their mobile credits, they pay 50 cents a day, and after 12 months they own the solar home system. The solar home system gives them access to electricity, but at the same time the new versions of it have a TV for education, it has a fridge for healthcare, so vaccinations, for example, right? So it's a very interesting play, and today we power over 700,000 households. 700,000. So when you got to that scale, that's when we consider that impact investment, because it's
the
got
impact is larger.
Well, the impact is larger, but because the margin that you make is so small, but you got to scale 7,000 that you can actually be profitable, right? And that one, in the last round, I can send you some information, but in the last round, we closed the round. I think we raised about 20 million for them, and we brought in some of the leading sustainable private equity funds as well, like Generation, which is Al Gore's fund. So that's considered even a traditional, even a sustainable traditional PE investor can invest in them. So it shows you that you can actually drive impact, and you can do that in a profitable way. But it needs to get to that level of scale. You see the difference? So I'm trying to show you the difference between how these two strategies work hand in hand. For the early stage deals or for certain solutions, that by definition can never be an investment. Pollution, who's going to pay for that? In fact, we would rather do it as a donation because we want to remain independent. Because if you fund them, people might say, oh, you're getting profit from them. Are you working with some companies and not others? Right? It's better to maintain that independence, which is why Ma Jun set up this NGO. And I know one of the questions was on awards. I can send you a lot of stuff on Ma Jun, but even when you Google it, Ma Jun was the first Chinese to ever receive the Skoll Award for social entrepreneurship. The Skoll Award is given by Jeff Skoll, the founder of eBay, to the top dozen or so social enterprises globally, and he's one of them. So so that's on the venture philanthropy side. Then you want more on the impact investment side, or is it you understand?
Basically, my understanding is the VP is more like the charitable element is more, but impact investment is more.
I wouldn't put it that way, okay? Because let's think about it. Actually, what does the word philanthropy mean, right? Philanthropy means, it's from the Latin word meaning philanthropos, right? philo is the love of, anthropos is humanity, the love of humanity. What combines these two approaches is really the love of humanity. You're trying to fix a problem. But when the problem is too early, or when the problem is too early, or it's in a sector that can never really get to profit, then we do that through venture philanthropy. I don't like to use the word charitable because the intention is throughout. The good intention, even for impact investment, is charitable, as in the intention. But the outcome is that the solution is profitable. I think that should be, if you're writing to your readers, it should be trying to re-educate the way they think, right? Because if I want to fund something like girls or pollution, maybe I'm prepared to lose 100% of my financial, right? But it doesn't change. But if that same solution is funded through a profitable way, you know, it doesn't mean that because you do it with profit that it's less charitable, if that makes sense.
Is it? Do you mean that it's also it's helping others, but on the other hand, it's gonna to get returns? Is it gonna to be profitable in the future?
What I'm saying is that even for IPE, like the pollution or the girls, I don't think it'll ever be profitable. Not in a way that can attract investment capital. It's the type of problem and the type of solution that determines what's the right type of capital. But the charitable nature of both remain. You sort of understand, am I losing? It's kind of hard to explain. It's kind of hard to explain, but the way that I think you should mention to the readers is they first need to see what are the causes that they want to support. Flip it around, right? Let's talk about all of us. What are the causes that we want? Now, if we care about certain problems like pollution, then maybe that should be done under a grant approach, so maybe through a donation, through their foundation. But if that same problem at the end of the day could be scaled to an app for example, that can actually be scaled profitably, then that should be done in the impact investment. Still the same problem that they're trying to fix, but the solution is different.
I guess I will try to...
Maybe what I suggest is, because I think in 45 minutes is a lot to take in, what I can do, I can give you these actual links to the example so you can read it yourself, then you can see what I'm talking about. You know, but it's hard to take in at a concept level. You have to kind of see at the next two levels, at the ground level.
So, do you have any impressive projects before that?
So I like to think IPE and Educate Girls are pretty impressive on the venture philanthropy side. On the impact investment side, I think MCOPA is a pretty strong one that has really scaled in Africa. But if you're talking about Asia, I can give you two more. So one of them is say, okay, so Southeast Asia, right? Southeast Asia, essentially many of the poor people are farmers. So we wanted to find a way whether we could help the farmers there. And the problem with farmers, just generally with smallholder farmers, because their plots of land are so small, they lack access to quality inputs, they lack access to farmer training, they lack access to credit because they still need funding, right? In order to buy the beans, buy the seeds, buy the fertilizer, right? They need access to markets, which is really important. And finally, they need access to technical systems because how they grow affects yields, how they plant affects how big the fruit is and everything, right? So we invested in a company in Philippines, and again, I'll send you the name. It's called Kenema Food International, KFI. And KFI essentially is a cacao producer. Cacao meaning the raw product for chocolate, right? So you can kind of understand when you look at the world, most of the chocolate comes from the Ivory Coast in Africa, and that yields are going down, and a lot of the farms have recently been investigated because they have child labor, etc. So we believe that we have the ability to grow a farm that connects all the five things, give them high quality inputs, farmer training, gives them access to credit, gives them access to market, and the company actually buys back at a fixed price, so there's transparency. Because quite often in these farms, they have middlemen, and the middleman gives them very low pricing, right? So if you take this model and you look at it, there are a lot of charities, there are a lot of NGOs out there that might be giving free inputs or free fertilizers, but they didn't give them access to the market. What's the point? At the same time, there are many investors that are funding post-harvest processing, but they don't teach them how to plant. So a model like this, why I like it, because it's an integrated end-to-end model. Okay, it's integrated end-to-end that actually addresses the solution that they need. And this is why I talked about impact investing being very solution-oriented, right?
So not just help them by the resources, but help them to self-grow.
Absolutely, because you might have a lot of charities that are giving free seats, but if you don't connect the value chain, you still don't get the productivity, you don't get the yields. At the same time, a lot of investors might want to invest in the yields, but then they don't actually train them. So you see, it's a whole problem. So I like the Kenema example because it's really one where we invested in them. They had about 3,000 farmers. Now they have over 20,000 or close to 20,000 farmers. So you can really see the impact grown. And at each level, each farming family has increased their productivity about 3 to 4 times, and therefore household income as well. So we measure across all our portfolio, we measure the reach of impact and the depth of impact. So in this case, the reach would be from 3,000 to 20,000 farmers. The depth of impact would be the increase in household savings, the increase in productivity of the cacao, and basically how that improves their livelihoods. So we measure the 2 dimensions. So I like this one because this one really can scale, because Indonesia has the same similar problem in Southeast Asia, even China to some extent, right? Then the next one is, I think sometimes when people think of impact invested philanthropy, they think, oh man, it's very boring, right? A lot of the boring stuff. So I like to use the example in China of Mama Davi, or Chinese Davi Dian. Davi Dian, maybe you've heard of it. It's China's one of the largest leading e-commerce platforms for mothers, basically. So if we look at China, essentially they lack access to maternal educational products. Remember what happened with the milk powder, the scare? So they don't know whether they can buy reliable products, maternal educational products, right? Same with books. A lot of times, you know, when you're buying books for our children, you see, look at it, oh my god, the translation is completely wrong, right? So, you know, these 2 things as parents we worry about, right? So this one is the problem. At the same time, a lot of the women in tier 2, 3 or 4 cities, the moment they become a mother, household income is halved, right? Because one parent stops working, right? Single child policy, right? I mean, now changing, but that's the idea. So we thought, isn't there a way that you can connect the 2, where you essentially work with mothers, where they sell maternal educational products to each other, and they do it through the WeChat platform. So the WeChat platform allows them a way to set up these micro stalls where they sell to each other, and there's accountability because it's not just online, it's offline as well. So for example, I may buy things from you, but I say, hey, so your 3-year-old son and my 3-year-old daughter really likes this book, for example. So why don't we join a reading club? So they have an offline community where they can read together. You see? So it's a pretty interesting model, and it's why I say it's quite sexy, because the deal was actually referred to us by the 2 leading investors. The leading investor was the venture capital arm of Walt Disney, so the very strong merchandising. At the same time, it had Lightspeed, which is one of the big VC funds that was invested in GoPro and Snapchat and things like this. So I use that as an example because even on the venture capital side, they are now seeing the value of impact, and they're the ones that the CEO, because they grew up in a family that was very much brought up by his mother, he wanted to really make sure that this model scales and grows profitably in a way that preserves the authentic mission to help women in China. So so therefore they invited us as an impact investor to join the round. So I think it's quite an interesting story where even the other side of the universe, because I think quite often we think, oh, it starts from philanthropy, right? But the truth is all investments should create positive impact and add to sustainable development. So today, Mama Davi, again, I'll send you some information on this one, has over 1 million users now and scaling.
So do LTT get some awards towards these projects?
So at many levels, we have won, as a team itself, we have won many awards across the whole ESG and the impact space. Again, I don't need to go through, but I can send you by email, it's useful, you can see the links themselves. And then at the same time, our portfolio organizations like IPE or Mama Davi, they have also won awards. So I can follow up by email if it's easier, so at least you don't waste time to talk about each one.
But personally, what LTT attracts you to join?
For me, so I am a reformed banker. I would say that, and I felt very much that I wanted a career that. Do you know what Ikigai is? Ikigai, Ikigai. I think it's very interesting. You can Google it. Ikigai is basically 4 things. Okay, one is what you're passionate about, what you're good at, which is your skill set, what the world needs, which is the sustainable development and the impact point, and finally what someone will pay you for, because we all need to be sustainable, right? So the middle part is ikigai. So although when I joined LGT I didn't have the word ikigai, but I now know that it's my ikigai. You know, in a way it's something that really aligns my passion, but my beliefs, my values, in a way which is also sustainable, right? So I think I joined that, and I think, you know, I very much, when I met Prince Max, who's the CEO of LGT, you know, almost 6.5 years ago, I was very, very impressed with the same story I shared with you in the beginning, that a 900-year-old family can thrive. I mean, if you see Liechtenstein, it's a small country, but it can thrive to be, you know, today LGT is the largest privately owned group in the world, right? With a very, very strong value system. And you know, our tagline this year, and I don't say it's a tagline because we generally walk the talk, is values worth sharing. When you ask me about our leadership and our stewardship, we tend as a firm not to tell other people what to do, but we tend to say, look, this is what we're doing, and we think we're good. If you think we're good at it, then come and do it with us.
So use actions.
Absolutely, because you know, impact investing, because it's impact, it's all about action. You can't just talk about it. You need to be in the field, and you need to be very clear that, you know, I often say impact investing is a contact sport. You need to be in the field to play. And when you play in the field, it has to be a team play. That means you have to do it with a lot of people. So we often work with other investors to co-invest. We even work with many NGOs and many charitable organizations because they've been on the ground for a long time. We see this as, can we come together and do something greater together? And I use the SDGs because the SDGs, defined by United Nations in 2015, has very clear outcomes. Like SDG 1 is poverty alleviation, right? So do we want to work together for what? Of course we do. You know, some of them are based on healthcare, some are based on water. So the SDGs has been a very easy way to align the outcome and then try to find a solution together. So that's why I think it's interesting. And maybe one piece I should mention is, which I haven't yet, is on the ESG piece as well. So what we've talked a lot about is on venture philanthropy and impact investing, which is done by my team. But as a firm, we are one of the earliest pioneers in ESG as well. So impact investing generally as an asset class, it relates to private equity or unlisted assets. But the wider investment universe, right, which is the 80 trillion or so out there, is mainly in public equities, so the stuff that we see in the stock exchange, fixed income, for example, ETFs, right, funds, right? So across these asset classes, we also see that there is a convergence as well. So it started first with ESG, like I mentioned, where they essentially knew that they were screening out the harm. And when the industry first started, maybe 2 decades ago, it started mainly as a risk mitigation strategy. But what's interesting in the last few years of that convergence is they now know that by screening out the bad and incorporating good environmental, social and governance factors, it actually leads to strong performance too. So by incorporating the good, they're actually not diluting their financial returns. In fact, they're adding to financial returns and reducing risk, which has a portfolio effect. And I just want to do a bit of an introduction also to our asset management side, which is Capital Partners. They share the same office as us. And you know, Capital Partners is one of the pioneers and leaders in the ESG space. They manage 12 sustainability funds across various asset classes, from equities to fixed income. And basically, all of these funds, you know, I think assets under management are just over 6 billion and growing, right? So we see that as a very core part of the portfolio as well. And maybe one point I hope it comes out in your piece is that when people think about investing, they should think about our whole portfolio. So most of us, like all of us here, we have shares, we have bonds, we might sometimes invest in funds, and we might have private equity and other alternatives. So we should think about making the entire portfolio sustainable. It's not just one piece of it. You see, sometimes the issue that we have is we may have investors that say, oh, I'm just going to make a lot of money here and I don't think about the good, but we're just going to do a lot of good here. When you look at the portfolio, when you net it off, actually all the good that you've done, maybe say through philanthropy, might not actually outweigh all the bad that these investments have done. So a sensible investor needs to look and ask himself, is my portfolio sustainable? Which means that any harm or risk factors, we should be aware of it, but we should also try to invest in future-proof solutions. And my guess is that with the way the environment and society is operating, we have to invest proactively in solutions which are good for society and environment.
Is it, do you mean that measuring the performance of the investment portfolio, not just only the money return, but also the social impact?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, just to speak, if I put my investor hat, quite often when we look at investments, we talk about risk and return. Now we bring in the narrative of impact. Now let me ask you the question, maybe we can ask the investors the question, do you think that impact, societal and environmental impact, has an implication on risk and return?
Yeah.
Of course it does. I only have to look outside and then see the climate change that's hitting all of us, rich and poor, to know that of course it hits risk and return. So a sensible and forward-looking investor must factor impact into the discussion on risk and return, because it affects both. My thesis, or rather our thesis at LGT, if you invest in positive impact, it only has a positive implication on risk and return. It brings down risk and it actually increases returns.
Yeah. So maybe how would you sum up the LGT's effort put in the sustainable development?
Well, I like to think that's not an effort. I like to think that we're actually informing people that this is the right way forward. And I think we want to be very, very authentic about it. And the truth is that I think as any new industry comes, there will always be risk there. There will be certain projects that fail. But overall, we believe that many will succeed. And when you succeed doing this strategy, it doesn't just make sense on the investment. That means that you're not just producing positive returns financially, but socially and environmentally, but you're also producing a lot of positive impact with knowing your identity, your succession, and your legacy. And that's something that, being a family-owned organization, is very, very important to us. We're not just a bank. We're not just an asset management company. We're a financial institution that believes in creating positive identities that that led by positive values that create positive legacies. And that's why we're doing it, right? Because these investments, I think a lot of our investors, whether private institutions that work with us, they believe in wanting to create positive legacies. And positive legacies attract positive people that believe in those legacies. So I think it's much greater than just the investment itself. It's something that is very core to us as a firm.
Is it the mindset of the investor is also changing?
Yes, absolutely. The mindset of the investor is changing, and I alluded to that a little bit earlier when I said that it's gone from a risk mitigation point of view to a value creation point of view. So people don't just want to know where the fires are, they want to know how they can put out the fires and actually prevent more fires in the future. So actually do some good.
So maybe a few more questions, because maybe can you share more about your personal experience, how ESG or sustainable development, and how it can help your job in LGT?
Yes, so I think first and foremost, when I told you about Ikigai, the good thing about doing Ikigai, you find other people that also came here because of Ikigai. So I think myself and my team and many of my colleagues in LGT, we really enjoy this. I mean, we don't just see it as something that we do 9 to 5 when we go home. We actually talk about it all the time, because it's something that we're very passionate about. So unlike my previous jobs, it's something that I feel very inspired by. When I wake up in the morning, I feel very inspired because it's not just talk, it's actually making a difference. And in some of the companies, I personally led the 2 investments that I mentioned, and I've seen it grow from a farm of 3,000 to a farm of 20,000. I've seen Mama Davi go from a concept, just on a PowerPoint, to actually a platform that has over 1 million users. I see, like when I want to show you the app, and I can share. All of you can download this. It's called the Blue Map. So when you turn this app, you can see, if I can get online. Yeah, Blue Map. You can see real time. Let it load up. Okay, so if I click map, right? See, I can see air, all water, soil, enterprise. So if I click, see, I can tell you exactly what's the different air pollution at the moment. I can click water, and I can see all the companies that are basically polluting. See, I can see where the biggest, this is real-time data. So I feel that in any way, if we want to imagine, if they want to change behavior, not just individual behavior, but corporate behavior, it starts with knowing the knowledge. And it's really interesting because some of these companies, like Apple, for example, they might not know at the provincial level that they're polluting. So we're actually doing them a favor. And when they know, they realize we got to change. So I feel that, if you ever search a YouTube video called "How to Start a Movement," yeah, I think this one's amazing. It starts off with a person in a park dancing in a very funny way, and it starts off by saying, first you need a weirdo, but after the weirdo, you have two people that are early adopters, the pioneers, and before you know it, everyone starts dancing in a funny way. So I believe that with ESG, or generally with sustainable investment, it's a bit of a movement. It started a few decades ago, and now I really see the traction. And when I see things like this happening, it doesn't matter which sector, which country, it's really creating a movement because people believe it's the right thing to do, right? To invest responsibly, to operate sustainably, and to do it in a way that inspires others positively has to be the right thing to do. So this is something that personally and professionally I find really really what keeps me very excited about my job. Although I'm a bit tired from all the traveling.
Yeah. Thank you for
Not at all.
Yeah.
And when I was just at another bank which I cannot mention, but from their very high and very nice office, I took this view today. I just literally 2 hours ago. Look at the pollution. Do I need to tell anyone that we should be investing in fixing the problem? Right? So this was, in this same building, but a very high, and I was like, oh my goodness, I am so shocked. I leave the panel to take the picture and come back and say, should we even be talking about this? So I think it's the right thing to do, right? And I think the time is right that people are listening, because every decision has a push and pull. So I like to think that people that are pioneers are driven by the pull. I mean, it's the right thing to do, come on, we should do it. But even for the people that don't care, they're driven by the push. Because whatever you do now, like I said, the impact, even if you didn't want to care about it, it's starting to affect you on the returns and the risk side. So you have to care.
I will mention this point.
Yeah, I think so, right? I think you guys are believers. I think you're believers. And we don't even have to mention the point, because you can see that 23 trillion out of the 80 trillion in the in capital markets is already allocated to sustainable investment strategy. So it's really, it's really happening. And maybe one final thing on the thought leadership side, I think with the United Nations SDGs, and I think with because the United Nations SDGs is not at the private sector level, it's at the government and the national level, right? Because the countries are signed to it. 195 countries, I believe, have signed up for the SDGs, right? And at the same time, organizations like UNPRI, so United Nations Principles of Responsible Investing, we have been members of that since 2008, and with the 23 trillion that I mentioned, really are members of that, which is 1/4 and growing. I mean, it's actually very sizable now. I mean, when I joined the space 11 years ago, it was a fraction of that, right? Impact investing at the same time has grown from, I think, 114 billion 2 years ago to 238 billion. I can send you the research reports to prove that. So it's actually doubled in 2 years. It's amazing, right? So it's still small, but it's growing with a vengeance. So that's why I'm saying that even if you wanted to say that is this just a theory, is what Ernly said just a prediction, or is it happening as we speak? It's really happening, right? And investors are working to show you that they're allocating to the space, which is the best way to assess whether they believe what I'm saying. I just think that we could do it faster, and I think we should do more of it.
Then, any future plan for that in LGT? Any future plan other than here?
So I think that in the past we used balance sheet and family office to make investments, and I think that directionally a lot of both private clients as well as institutional clients are asking us to do more with us. So I think as we go forward, we might be thinking along certain things that we can products or projects that we can work together with others, because we're ultimately trying to leverage our resources and our skill sets to do more, create more impact together. And maybe one example of that on the banking side is M-KOPA, the African company I mentioned. So it needs capital, right? All companies need capital to grow, and M-KOPA needed to have working capital. So we thought also, and capital in Africa, working capital debt, is very expensive, right? So we thought, is there a way that we can work with our banking colleagues to structure a working capital loan note? So it's like a loan, short-term loan, which is cheaper than what they'll otherwise get in Africa, but it's better. I mean, it's not that far off from market returns. So we actually did a round, and we was oversubscribed in LGT Bank, and we provided working capital loans to M-KOPA that was cheaper than in Africa, but it was actually pretty close to market returns for a short-term debt. So it's a win-win situation, and many of our private banking clients actually really enjoyed it because they took a personal interest in the impact. And I think because of that, they're more interested in impact investing as well.
So thank you for
No,
sharing.
thank you. I hope that's useful. I mean, like I said, I know that with these interviews, there's a lot to take in, and apologies if I didn't explain anything. But
very clear.
but you know, by all means follow up. I can send you some links to the company so you can actually see them. And maybe one suggestion maybe for articles, provide the link so people can actually, I don't know what's online, but people can actually maybe click and see it. Or you can even have pictures that you can get from the website. I mean, they're very happy, or we can even send you some pictures, because I think impact investing is exciting, but it's not as exciting when you actually see the impact created. You need to link it with what's happening on the ground, otherwise it's too theoretical.
Really the story behind.
Exactly, right? The story behind it I think is interesting. I think Marjun and IP has this amazing video that when you watch it, it does such a good job of, you know, of explaining what they do. Right?
Yeah. So thank you for sharing.
唔該晒，thank you。我識講少少，其實唔夠，買好好。Yeah.
Speaks good Cantonese.
No, still learning.
When did you come to Hong Kong?
So I'm a Singaporean by birth, but I've been away for 22 years, and I spent 7 years in Hong Kong now. I'm still a Hong Kong PR, and I love Hong Kong because 我好鍾意食嘢。係啦，好啦，慢慢嚟。Thank you. No, thank you. I hope that's clear. Thank you. Yeah, sure. Okay. And anything that you want. I mean, as I've told quite a lot of you know, someone in Singapore as well. I think this narrative is really getting super popular. So it might be good to have one